started reading more into the Bible and started to see that theme over and over again. And it's almost like somebody went in and rewrote the whole Bible just to show me that God cared for me and didn't care about what he had done in the past. And it was pretty cool. So from that point on, I had like a little bit more of a spiritual awakening.
Tanner, we just finished recording with David Mike and his book. I already had a copy, but he gave you a copy and signed it for you. But his book, Dishonor, and kind of his story of joining the military, from a military background to going to jail, being in Leavenworth for 3 years and did almost twice as long in jail as he did in the military, and just kind of his redemption story, finding God, or I guess he always knew God, or knew of God, but he didn't know God. And then his story after that, kind of his story with cancer, and not only his story with cancer, but he had 3 family members at the same time going through cancer, and his mom passing away and all that stuff. So it's kind of a very event-filled life, and just kind of that walk and how God has led him through that. So you didn't know his story, you hadn't read the book before, so how was that for you?
No, this is phenomenal. I think this is probably one of our best podcasts yet, and just being able to hear his story and hear how much he gives it all back to Christ. We talked a lot about identity, which we talked about on multiple other podcasts, but him talking about how important that identity is to him now, and looking at the book and what he identifies as is, Christian first, father, husband, I just think it was such a good conversation. It's cool to hear, the perspective of someone who lived this life that almost is outcast from society typically, and see him reintegrate and thrive and really create this ministry and impact so many people. It's incredible.
Yeah, I think his story lets you know that one successful thing or one failure doesn't define you. Like, he screwed up pretty good. He got sentenced to 5 years in Leavenworth. I mean, they don't just hand those out for no reason. So, but here he is, father of 5 and husband and, all that stuff, and active member in society, teaching young young 18, 19, 20-year-olds, give them a trade and all that stuff. So don't let one thing define you, I guess, is
absolutely
one of the big takeaways.
Yeah, absolutely. And he talked, a lot about drug addiction issues and, the personal, where he was at internally, going through all this process and the things that he did to get through it. And I think one of the most impactful things was not even what was within his control, but his parents, and how they still, were there for him and stuff, and how important it is to have those people or be those people for someone else. And so I'm very grateful for this conversation. I think it turned out terrific.
Cool. Well, I think on that note, we just send people in and let them enjoy it. So
absolutely. And I advise everyone to stay to the end, listen to how to get a hold of him, because he does give these books away for free. So listen to the end to find out how to get one for free.
On that, we'll see you into the episode with David and Mike. Welcome, David. Appreciate you showing up and coming here with us, and kind of want to dive into your story. You got a different story than a lot of people that we've talked to. You have a military background. However, I'll show the name of your book, Dishonor. You didn't have a great military experience, and from there it ended up in Leavenworth for a number of years, and I'll read the second part of so the name of your book is Dishonor, One Soldier's Journey from Desertion to Redemption. And so kind of your story from Leavenworth, being redeemed out of that, you walk with Christ after that, and kind of where you're at today. So I don't want to steal too much of your story, but kind of, can you start us off? I know you're a military brat, and kind of just general upbringing there, and kind of go from there.
Okay. So I do appreciate you guys letting me share my story with your
I appreciate you sharing your story, not only to us, but also in the book.
Yeah. So I grew up as a military kid. My dad was career Air Force and drove us around the world for years. And so when I was in high school, I took ROTC and was wanted to like do the military thing. So I prepped up for that and was super gung ho to join the service. And he was also a music director, and so I grew up in the church and kind of had a faith background. But I think all of us when we're young, we don't really understand what they're saying half the time. Well, in my experience, I was spiritually deaf and just kind of went because I knew I was supposed to, and it was the life that we lived. So I did that, and then once I joined the military, kind of got off on my own, and I was dating somebody, and it went south, and I got real depressed, real sad, and some of my friends took me out to a club one night, like, hey, let's go and hang out and forget about your depression and sadness. And next thing you know, I'm taking a pill, and my whole life changed. Somebody gave me a hit of ecstasy, and after that, I just couldn't get enough of it. So I just started taking it. I think just to numb the pain of life and escape the feelings that I was having. And once I started taking it, my friends saw me getting it pretty quickly, and they're like, hey, let me just give you some money. You can go get it for me. I'm like, yeah, no problem. So I was on active duty at the time. So I would take the money, I'd go to the dealer, and I would get it. And next thing you know, I'm dealing it. And then I'm taking trips to Houston, Texas from Fort Leavenworth, Louisiana, and bringing big shipments of it, and just kind of snowballed from there. But,
so you're driving 3 hours,
yeah,
roughly, to go get drugs,
yeah.
shipments of drugs, not like you were muling it and bringing it back to the base area.
Yeah, that and the local clubs.
And kind of giving it out to the local community.
Yes.
And Fort Polk's not a very big area. It's
not the town surrounding it, but yeah, no, definitely not. So I used to go to Alexandria because that was where the fun was.
Yeah.
If you want to call it that.
The trouble was, for sure.
For sure.
So you did that, it was quite some time, a year or a couple of years, something like that, before you got...
Yeah, I think I was dealing, actually it wasn't very long on the drug side of it, but in the military, when you get in trouble, you just turn somebody else in to get a little bit of time knocked off your sentence. So somebody did that to me, and so they were after me. And so they did catch me. I ended up disappearing for 6 months, hence the desertion, because my unit went to Panama and I went to Houston, Texas. And I just basically lived off of selling drugs as a runaway soldier. And then I was eventually captured again and had a court martial and ended up in Fort Leavenworth for 3 years. I had a 5-year sentence, but I ended up doing about 3 years.
So about 3 years in Leavenworth. So, yeah. And during this whole time, your dad was still active duty.
Yes. Yeah.
And so he was in England, if I'm not mistaken.
He was in Germany at the time. Yeah.
And then so he came for your court martial.
Yeah.
And that was a big...
it was a big deal.
Big deal for him, kind of as a character witness, if you will. And
yes.
But anyhow, kind of talk about to be honest with you, I think you're the only person I personally know that's been at Leavenworth and been out. What's it like?
So it was a pretty dark and depressing place to be, not just emotionally, but spiritually. The place has been around for over 100 years, 150 years. It was just kind of a dark place. There's a lot of sadness there. You have a lot of time to kind of sit around and think about what you've done. And the thoughts in your head aren't always most positive. You got a big flag and military soldiers guarding you, and you're in there with a bunch of inmates who are also former military, but it's a lot of disgrace, a lot of depression, a lot of sadness. So I had to work when I was there. Everybody has to work, so I worked in the dining facility, which was probably a blessing because I'm a little guy and being in prison, you have things to look out for yourself. So working in food service I think I was taking care of me by putting me there. I really wanted to get into the barber shop because that's kind of what passion of mine was, cutting hair on the side, but I never got in there. But while I was in there, I did all the stuff that they asked me to do in order to fulfill all the things I needed in order to get parole and to be released. I'm not going to say I had my mind right at all. There was lots of instances that along the way I just saw God showing up in my life to kind of get my attention. Obviously, prison was one. I had OD'd before I went in there, and I had also told people that I was going to, if I ever got caught, I was going to take all the drugs that I had in my pocket. And the night before I was arrested, I accidentally put them all in Ziploc baggies for no apparent reason. So when they arrested me, I had no way to consume them.
And you hadn't done that before?
No, never. So I feel like it was divine intervention to keep me from taking myself out or hurt myself pretty badly. But while I was in there, I had a chance to, be around all kinds of different people and learn how to navigate that community. But also, I was listening to a radio broadcast, and I heard this Christian speaker on there talking about grace and forgiveness, and I was like, what is this? I mean, I know what it is, but I didn't understand it to the scope of what he was explaining it. And he told me that, or he said to somebody that was calling in, how many of the sins that you committed were in the future before Christ died for them? And it's like all of them. And I was like, whoa, this is really mind-blowing, because I always thought that as a kid growing up, you had to get right with God or you're going to get zapped, in your seat. And so I didn't realize that God was a loving character, God, or a loving father. From the Bible, I always thought he was just kind of like a mean guy telling you to stay in line, just like in the military, follow the rules and I'm in charge. But it was definitely not like that. So it was very eye-opening for me to hear that, and started reading more into the Bible and started to see that theme over and over again. And it's almost like somebody went in and rewrote the whole Bible just to show me that God cared for me and didn't care about what he had done in the past. And it was pretty cool. So from that point on, I had like a little bit more of a spiritual awakening.
Had you read the Bible before?
Definitely.
Or you had?
Yeah, I'm one of those, kids that grew up and going to church probably 4 or 5 days a week, and had the sword drills and all the stuff. So yeah, we definitely had a lot of indoctrination, but not a whole lot of
You weren't feeling it.
spiritual connection. Yeah.
So with your dad being in the Air Force, what led you to go Army?
So I went to junior ROTC in high school in Louisiana for 2 years. I did Marine Corps, and then I moved to Germany. And so the 2 years I spent in Germany, I was in Air Force ROTC. So you put the two together and kind of like get a middle ground. But I also had a friend who joined, and he was a Cav Scout and went airborne. And I was like, I want to do that. Just, I watched Rainbow movies growing up, and so I kind of had that need to do that, I suppose.
And that's what were you?
A Cavalry Scout.
Okay, that's what I thought. So you were a person in the woods playing hide and go seek.
Pretty much. Never really got to see any action, which is probably also a blessing, but definitely that was the goal, do all that boy stuff, blow things up and fire weapons and
Absolutely. I mean, kids growing up, they play Army, they don't play Air Force, right?
I feel kind of bad though, because I used to tell my dad I don't want to sit behind a desk, but I kind of wish I had picked a desk job. Of course, I know the Air Force doesn't just sit behind a desk, but when you're 18, you know what I'm talking about.
There's every branch has their pros and cons.
Yes, definitely.
But I've read the whole book, so, and I know them. So what do you?
Yeah, no, I haven't read the book yet. I got to just look at it briefly before you got here. But the thing that stood out to me was what you wrote in the copy that you signed for Ryan, and that your past does not define you. How much does that statement mean to you in a day-to-day and your interactions with other people?
So for many years, I lived with the guilt and shame of my past and the things that I've done. I have an entire career family of military service and honorable at that. I've got, Marines, Navy, Air Force, Army, everybody. My little brother got shipped off to Afghanistan, and I was freaking out because he went 4 times, and I thought, if anything happened to him, and I'm sitting here with a dishonorable discharge, I just wouldn't forgive myself. And so I really struggled with that. And then I remember that broadcast that I heard, and a verse that stood out to me was Romans 8:1, where there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And literally no condemnation. It doesn't matter what you've done in the past, in the future, or anything. It's all forgiven, and you just have to accept it. And so for me to know that I didn't have to do anything gives me the freedom to live in Christ and my identity in Christ, and not in the labels that have been given to me throughout my life as an inmate or a drug dealer or a convict or a dishonorably discharged service member. So it was very freeing.
And we just had a podcast where we talked about identity in depth and our perspectives on it. And that's the next thing that I noticed is looking at your bio in the back of the book. It said follower of Christ, husband, father, and everything else you've done.
Right.
So at what point, obviously I know in the journey of my faith with Christ, it's more of a choice than it is an achievement. And I think that's where people go wrong, where they think that, we talk about investors, is I'm an investor when I do something. Whereas, with being a follower of Christ, you're a follower of Christ when you choose to be, when you welcome him into your life. And so where along your journey did you start to identify primarily as a Christian before everything else that you were doing or had done?
Well, I think I've always called myself a Christian because I grew up, under that denomination, if you want to call it that. But I think it was after hearing the grace and forgiveness message from the radio broadcast, and the guy was named Bob George, and he wrote a book called Classic Christianity, and it just really broke down grace and forgiveness, and that's where I really identified as a forgiven child of God versus a Christian who goes to church, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
And then that just kind of opened up my eyes. And I would say when I first got out, I had a lot of legalism still kind of in my system from growing up in kind of under that type of denomination. And I remember seeing people who were doing things wrong, and I'd call them out thinking I was helping them out. And then I went to a church and started learning about what matters most is people finding Jesus. And the only way to do that is to live in a way that people want to be like you, and it's definitely not calling people out for the things that they've done wrong. And I have no room to talk because of my past and history. So I think that was where I started to mature as a Christian and realize that loving people is what's most important, and showing people the love of God through letting Him love them through you.
I think that's the most phenomenal point is obviously a lot of doors have probably been shut on you because you have that asterisk on your record. I mean, a dishonorable discharge looked the same as a felony is on the civilian side. So
it is. So you're a convicted felon.
Technically, when I left Fort Leavenworth, I actually went on federal parole in order to come to Omaha, and my dad was stationed here. That's how I ended up here. And so I actually have a record, and so I've always had to fill that box, check that box, and it was very frustrating when I first moved to Omaha. So I went to about 50 different locations trying to find a job, and I kept checking that box, and they're like, "Oh, you don't really have the skill we're looking for." I'm like, "I see high school kids working in your kitchen, and I worked in the dining facility. I know I can do this job." It was very hard, But eventually, what I did is I just went in and told. I went to Shopco. It was like a local retail store, and I said, "Hey, I just need to speak to the manager." And I just told him, "Hey, this is what's going on. If you hire me, I promise I'll be hard working for you." He's like, "Okay, let's do it." So that face-to-face interaction and relationship is really important.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and with every door that's slammed, that they're not interested. It opens up the opportunity for you to pursue this, entrepreneurial path, and helping teach other people, but also I think more than that is because you have, this less favorable past, it makes you more approachable for people who maybe are stuck on that path and they don't see any way out. And I think that's like God is working through you to connect to those people in a way that other people won't be able to. Someone who's grown up in the church and, checked every box of the things that you're supposed to do will never help lead that person to Christ because they don't relate to it.
Right. I didn't really realize this at the time, but being at the age that I was and the things I was doing is pretty common because your brain isn't fully developed and you make impulse decisions and choices. So I ended up going to hair school and then becoming an instructor based on the recommendation of my boss at the time, or the teacher that taught me. So my demographic is exactly the same age as I was when I got in trouble. So I've been teaching cosmetology students for the past over 30 years, and I'm able to stay relative to them because I know exactly what they're going through at that point in their life, and it's been really great to mentor, several thousand students over the years. And I think they look up to me in a way as a father figure now that I'm at the age I am because of the fact that I'm able to understand what they're going through. It's been really cool.
Interesting fact. So I've talked about it on the podcast, but I do normally Saturday rucking. Didn't have it today because the ice storm, and plus we were doing a few podcast recordings. But so that's how I met you, was through our Saturday morning rucking club. And one of our first ones there, you were asking me about my family and stuff like that, and said my wife does hair, and sure enough, you were one of her teachers.
Yeah.
And so one of the thousands that you've mentored is my wife, and 20 years later, you still remembered as soon as I said her name,
Yes.
who she was, and she remembered you and all that stuff. So it all comes full circle. So,
Right.
20 years, like I said, 20 years later, now we're hanging out on Saturdays. We go to church together and all that stuff. So it's interesting how the circle of life continues.
Yeah, and it's interesting how God connects people. So it's been a really cool journey for me.
So in my high school, we had a career technical center, which is similar to what they have, Millard West. My kids go to that school district, and I think it's a phenomenal program. I did auto body, auto shop, all that stuff. And so it's kind of, you're separate, but most of the females, they either did cosmetology or nursing. And one of the biggest things that I think that the school missed out on was teaching these girls about business ownership. because my understanding, and I know very little about cosmetology, is that a lot of them need to go rent a chair somewhere, or they have to build their own brand.
Right.
And so in your teaching, how much of it is the trade of actually hairstyling versus the business ownership?
I would say it's probably about 90% technical training and about 10% of the business training, but I do focus very heavily on building a clientele. I teach that specifically. It's one of my passions, as well as using social media in order to do that, and the journey that you'll have to take in order to fill up your books and have a business that you can either move into a commission salon or on your own. So I think by the time they graduate, they get it, and the goal is to try and get them to build while they're in school so they can take that clientele with them. So definitely one of my passions.
Absolutely. We start doing the same thing with real estate agents. Is when we bring on real estate agents while they're going through that licensing process, is to start talking about what they're doing and just share, because that's the biggest thing, is that people just don't know that you're doing this. And so I think building a brand is a lot more difficult than people may think. They think about building a brand like McDonald's or stuff like that, but you have to build your personal brand.
Right.
And so, I think that's great. Well, so along the journey of reestablishing or establishing a relationship with Christ, were there people along the way that kind of helped you get there, or was it just sitting down, opening up the good book, and really getting honest with the words that it was speaking to you?
Yeah, it was definitely relationships and people feeding into me. I know that the whole time that I was on the run from the military, my parents and friends and family, people all over the world were praying for me, and I felt it specifically. And there's a few incidences where I could feel, God's presence because other people were trying to make that happen for me, to get me to kind of turn myself in and to do the right thing and get on with this journey of life and get this hiccup out of the way and move forward. I would say my parents were a really big influence on that. And then I had a lot of people along the way through the churches I've gone to and the people that I've hung out with or chosen to hang out with, to make sure that I'm having community with like-minded people. So
you talk about people praying for you. Didn't one of them actually come visit you in jail?
Right. So I had a crime partner who his family church in Georgia, there was a woman there who I used to be in the bulletin. Me and him would be in the bulletin.
And this was before you got captured, correct?
This is after we got
captured.
So he served time in Fort Riley, Kansas, and I was in Fort Leavenworth. So it's less our sentence in a different facility. So, but she prayed for us. And she happened to be driving through, and when she came to the prison, and they said I had a visitor. I had no idea who it was. My parents were overseas at the time, and I went in there, and I was just blown away that somebody that felt like was important enough to come say hi to. It was really cool. Definitely lifted my spirits, and at that time, because it was I think it was about 2 years in, and I was feeling pretty lonely and sad. So
because you hadn't had any visit, I think you up to that point maybe you had a female friend or something come visit you or something like that.
I had a friend come visit, but they didn't let her. She said she was my sister. They asked me what her name was, and I told them my sister's name, and it wasn't her, so they told her to go away. So yeah, my dad did visit me one time in the facility, but it was prior to the trial. But after that, I had no visitors other than some, we call them church people, some local Louisiana people who were in a prison ministry would come up and say hi, but I didn't know who they were. So that was my first visit from somebody who took the time, and she happened to be driving through and said, I'm going to stop and go visit him. So it was kind of cool.
So that has to be a hard, I hate to relate it to COVID, but like you were in prison with other criminals, no one to come visit, your family's overseas.
Mm-hmm.
So you're, as far as isolation, like that's isolated. Like I'm sure you had acquaintances in jail, but
right. But
how close do you want to get to another criminal?
Exactly. You gotta you gotta read the room. So yeah. So there were people that I would interact with, people I work with every day, and we kind of had a trust factor. But I definitely don't talk to any of them now. So that's how long those relationships lasted. As soon as I got out, I moved on for sure. But it was pretty sad. And then my dad got stationed at Offutt Air Force Base, which was 3 hours away. So I feel again that was God kind of giving me a community and protecting me by having my family nearby. And he used to come almost every weekend or every other weekend for until it became a little bit difficult. But that was really good for my spirits in that last year.
Yeah, I'm sure. Can you? I don't remember the name of the guy. No, it's not his real name in the book, but Thundercloud or
Thundercloud. Yeah. So there was a criminal investigation division. He was the chief at Fort Polk, and he was definitely I was kind of a thorn in his side because I was moving a lot of drugs on post and in the area. And I actually burned him. I told him I would help him, and then it disappeared. So then when he recaptured me, he was like, "You're going away forever." And then something inside of him when he arrested me told him to help me out. And I found out later, I actually reached out to him and I said, "Hey, I just want to tell you thank you because you saved my life. Because had I progressed on, I probably would have died." And the fact that he testified in my trial on my behalf because of some assistance I gave him after I was captured the second time. And he just didn't know what to do with it. He was like, "This is kind of crazy. People call me all the time to say I ruined their life." And so we developed a relationship over a few months, and then he just kept saying, "You know what? I just need to tell you that God told me to help you." And I was like, "That's kind of crazy." So now we're friends and we talk all the time. And he shares my book with a lot of people because it's his story as well. But obviously his name has changed. But yeah, it's been really cool. There's been a lot of God moments after writing the book that I can't even name them all. It's just been something.
Can you talk to the process? I find I think start off with blogging and stuff.
Oh, right.
Kind of for your own mental health, if you will.
Yeah.
And kind of getting the story out, and people empowered you to write the book. Can you talk about that process?
Yeah. So I joined a group with a guy named Johnny Acuff. He used to work for Dave Ramsey, and he was like one of the personalities. And it was called the START Experiment, where he just cultivated a group of people, about 3,000 people who wanted to do something that they've never done before. And I was like, "Oh, I kind of want to write a book." And so we crowdsourced with each other. There were authors in there and business people and all this kind of stuff. So the people who were writers said, "Just start a blog." And this is when blogging was really big. So it's been probably about 12 years ago, I think, when I started the blog. And I wrote my first post, and it didn't go viral, but people were like, "This story's kind of crazy." And so then I just kept blogging every Tuesday. I would post about 1,000 words, and it took me 3 years. And after the third year, and I finally finished, I took it all, compiled it, had somebody, a friend of mine, edit for me. And then I ended up self-publishing it through Amazon. And the reason why I did that was so I could control the book. Interestingly, it's a softback because I ship it to inmates for free, and it can't be a hardback book. So there's a lot that goes into that.
And you kind of use this as your ministry now.
Yeah, it definitely is my ministry for sure. Yeah. So if there's anybody that ever were to reach out to me and say, "Hey, I've got a family member, a friend incarcerated or going through treatment, or in stages of addiction," I just give them a free copy. So.
Yeah, I want to hear a little more about the isolation. I imagine when you were on the run, always looking over your shoulder, wondering when you had to know if inevitably you would wind up getting caught, and how isolated you might have felt. I mean, even trying to carry on with day-to-day business, and then also to be incarcerated. Did you feel at all like I'm in a place around people that are criminals? Like, these guys are criminals. I don't belong here. Or was it kind of accepting, like, yeah, that was about time?
So while I was on the run, I had a group of people that I ran with. So I was never really alone, but I never was really fully conscious because I had self-medicated almost the entire time. I was lucky to come out of that alive just because I just kept consuming and I could get my hands on it whenever I wanted. So it was readily available. Once I was captured, I did go through kind of a isolation and withdrawal, and that was pretty hard. Felt basically sad and for myself, and I wasn't really feeling guilty at the time. I was just feeling sorry for myself. But then when my dad came to my trial, that was pretty big. And I felt bad for him having to see me that way. And then I didn't realize until way later, I'm like, he had to get military orders to come to my court martial, and that could have hurt his career. And luckily, his boss was a Christian and kind of understood what was going on and didn't really hold it against him. So that was great. And I would say that once I got to Fort Leavenworth, it was a little hard at first, but then I integrated. And I still don't think I quite had my mind right. I was still young and not, just kind of living in the moment and doing the prison thing. I did what they told me. I made mistakes when I was in there, luckily not too bad. So I ended up being in there longer than I needed to. But probably the biggest moment for me was I actually did relapse while I was in confinement, and somebody handed me a hit of LSD and I took it. And that same day, when I got back to my to my room, there was a letter from my father saying that he would stake his job, his reputation, and his life on the fact that I would never do drugs again. The same day. So I feel like that was another God orchestrated moment to show me that what I was doing was not just hurting myself, but the people who loved and cared for me. So at that moment, I swore off drugs for life, and I've been sober since.
Yeah, you've never.
No.
When we've had this conversation, you haven't had a drop of alcohol or anything since that day. Since that letter.
Since that letter.
That was a powerful turning point.
Definitely a crazy moment for me, and I was just, I kind of lost it. I was like, I can't believe this just happened. And it's been so clean for like 2 years. So, it's that dangerous for me. And people are like, hey, you've been sober for long enough. You could probably have a drink and be fine. I'm like, nope, I would never want to go back to that. So, and it's not that I don't think I could or couldn't control it. I just don't. I have no desire. Yeah.
Yeah, my wife and I, we're right now testing our discipline. And so back in September, we just realized that drinking became habitual. It was every day, just done with work, gotta crack open a beer, come home, crack open a beer, and just not to the point where there was major issues, but it's more of just creating that discipline. And that's what I've said. Like, if I wanted to have another drink, I think I'd be fine. And I don't know that it's something that I'll keep up the rest of my life, but I think that the hardest part about that is the mental discipline behind it, because it is in any shape, it's an escape from your reality. And I think that people have this negative connotation around AA, but I know a lot of people that go to AA, and it's a lot of them are Christian ran and they have good intentions. It's a people organization.
Right.
So have you had any experience with those kinds of rehabilitation groups? Or
in prison, I had to go or I wasn't going to get out. So I went to Narcotics Anonymous and I took multiple classes. So the Army had a program set up for you. I had anger management, and these are things they assessed when I got there. I wasn't angry, but they made me take it anyways. I had to take drug and alcohol classes. I had to take Narcotics Anonymous. And then when I came out on parole, they told me to try AA and see if I liked it. I went to one thing, and I'm like, I literally am never going to do this again, so I don't need it. So not that I'm against AA, I just had no desire. And so I feel like I sort of became a workaholic for a while, and I worked 2 jobs while I was going to hair school. And then when I was in hair school, I also went to the instructor program, and I've always been kind of a hard worker. So I feel like I substituted some of those needs through working, I suppose. Now that I'm older, I've backed way off of the work, and I work a full-time job, but I don't do a whole lot of extra work. So
kind of talk about your transition. So you started off, you were in hair school. They said, hey, I think you'd be a good instructor. And so you went, like, you never cut hair. You were talking about building a brand and stuff before. Like, you went straight into instructing from one day being the instructee to instructor.
Yeah, I did go to school and then immediately went to the instructor program for 2 days a week, but I worked in a salon for 5 days a week.
Okay.
So I was working 7 days a week, 2 in school as a student teacher. That took me a year. And then after I graduated from that, I worked for, I think, a little bit longer, and then I moved out of state for a while. I worked in a couple of different salons, and then I worked in a barbershop for the Air Force, which was really cool because I felt like I was giving back to the military community by doing that.
That was in Lake East?
Lake East, yep.
Not you say it, I remember this conversation.
Yeah, so I did barber for it, which is also men's haircutting is my passion in the industry that I'm in now, as well as teaching. So then I came back to the U.S. and went back to the job that I was at before, and I stayed there for 27 years. And just recently switched to a new school that just opened up.
So we talked a little bit before this, like, kind of unpack that, because a lot of people we talk to are entrepreneurs, investors, stuff like that. But you are what I would call an entrepreneur in with your latest gig, and the fact that someone else who has started other businesses says, hey, I see a need in Omaha for this, or the metro. I see a need for this. However, I'm not the best person to run this. I think you are. And so she brought you in kind of as the operations person, and you're growing. You've only been open, 6 months, maybe? I
think it's almost a year now.
Almost a year, yeah. So
she opened up this school in Iowa first, and took the school over from the previous owners, and then kind of organized it to the way that she wanted it to be. And then she had talked to me about it actually prior to her actually opening the other school and taking their school on. But I was at the job I was at before, and my daughter was actually in school, and she said, hey, I want you to come do this. And I was like, I can't do that because I'm teaching my daughter. I can't leave her. And I didn't ever think I would leave that job anyways. So when the opportunity, in my mind, it was time to make a change, I reached out to her. She's like, see, we had this conversation, let's go. And she said, I really need somebody to help develop the curriculum and make sense of it, because she is a salon owner, a business owner, and she does a really good job of handling people, but she needed some organization of how to put all the curriculum together and the things that she felt like were very important for students to know to be successful in our industry. And so I was on board with her vision because it was very much aligned with what I believe students need to know also. So it was a perfect match. So I, over the past few months, have been helping her just make the curriculum make sense and solidify it so that any other teacher could jump in and teach it, and we're streamlining it. So there's not a lot of thought that needs to go into the development going forward.
And I think that's huge. Like, so many people like think just because you can cut hair that you can own a salon, or just because you can cut hair you can own a cosmetology school or something like it's the areas are a little different. Like you have your operational, systematizing the curriculum and all that stuff, but she's started other successful businesses, and so she has that area, and so bringing the two together is huge in my opinion. So like I said, you've been doing that for a few months now, and I see you growing. You seem excited about it.
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
So I wanted to hit on that, even though the main reason we have you here is because of the book. But
right.
I thought that was really good. So I want to, hopefully this isn't too big of a subject, but I know the last year hasn't been the easiest for you. Like, you had your struggles then, overcame them, got a family, kids, all that stuff now. But last year you've gone through cancer.
Yep.
You've lost your mom.
Yes.
Her birthday was just this week, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So it's been a tough road even since then. Like you probably thought worst of things.
Yeah, addiction in prison, that's it.
You're good. Life's good, but life continues and things still happen. So kind of unpack that, like your cancer, I think it was a year and a half ago you got diagnosed?
Yeah. It was July 5th, I believe, not last year, but the year before. Yeah, I woke up and had this thing going on with my mouth, and I wasn't sure what it was. And then the next day at work, that same day at work, I had two big lumps pop up on my neck. I'm like, that's not just a throat thing. So I went to the doctor, went to another doctor, another doctor, and I go, you have cancer. I'm like, great. That's just like in the movies, you hear you have cancer, and then everything just goes gray. They did a biopsy, and I almost passed out. My poor wife's sitting there watching it, and all these people were in the room, and I'm like, what is happening? But the craziest thing about that is I've never really felt like I've had cancer. I just felt like I went through cancer treatment because it was so fast. And then next thing you know, I'm having surgery, and that was painful. And then I had radiation, which was awful. And during that time, I can't even, just thousands of people prayed and supported and jumped in. But shortly after my diagnosis, my sister-in-law ended up with a stroke, and then also lung cancer, which was causing the stroke. And then my sister was diagnosed with breast cancer, and then my mom passed away. And so our family's been to the ringer. And me and my wife were just talking about this. It was yesterday, and she's like, yeah, 2024 has been good. I'm like, well, half of it. So I finished treatment at the beginning of the year, and I am finally coming around to the end of a lot of those side effects. I have a few other side effects because of that. But I think my faith has grown, my family's grown. We are all cancer-free, all three of us that have had cancer. My sister-in-law has some stroke issues, and my sister had just finished her last radiation treatment, so she'll have a journey from there. And then, we were at peace with my mom's passing because she had Alzheimer's for quite a number of years, and her quality of life is definitely degrading. And so we know that she's no longer suffering. So I would say really looking forward to 2025. I left a job that I was feeling a little less than important at it, and after so many years of working there, and now I'm in a job where I feel very valued. And so it's just I think 2025 is going to be my year, and my family's here.
What were the conversations with God like when all this was happening? Was it resentment? Was it victimization?
Do you feel like Job?
I felt a little bit like Job, but it was kind of weird. I think once I found out I had cancer, everybody was kind of jumped, on my bandwagon. But the minute my sister-in-law, she had it way worse than me. We really thought she wasn't going to make it, and so a lot of stuff shifted. And so I kind of, I wasn't doing it on my own, but I didn't really feel like I had that bad. So, and then finding out that my sister had to go through way worse treatment than me, but she had to go through chemo, and I didn't have to do that, thank goodness. So I feel like everybody else just had it worse than me all the time. So I was very grateful. The doctor told me I had the common cold of cancer, whatever that means. And so I kind of felt like that a little bit. So I don't ever feel like I had cancer. I just feel like I went through some stuff to get it to go away. And so I'm thankful. And I knew the whole time that God's not done with me yet. And so there was going to be something at the end of this that's going to be positive, and that I didn't have to worry about too much. So I think I was grateful the whole time. I wasn't happy about it, but it's definitely not super angry at all.
Well, do you think that because of your faith, you were able to have that mindset, which maybe I personally believe that there are people that can manifest cancer in themselves, and I've seen people that live in negativity and everything is victimization, and they almost create this cancer and woe is me, and those are the people that I don't think are going to make it through it.
Right.
Whereas being stronger in your faith and looking at it as almost like a non-issue of just, well, that's just a thing that's happening. It's be a good story someday almost.
Yeah. I know even so, like we did Thanksgiving at the hospital, and my sister-in-law was up there, and she was up there for a very long time, but I would go leave, and go get my radiation and come back. And we lived at the hospital for my sister-in-law. So it was really not about me. It was more about everybody else. And I'm just grateful that I didn't have to go through what other people have to go through. They do say that the head and neck radiation is the worst, and I won't agree with that 100%, but the hardest part about it, I think, was just I couldn't eat, and I was losing weight rapidly, and I'm not a big guy, so I was a little nervous. They told me that if I got down below 130, that I would have to get a feeding tube. So every time I weighed in, I brought a Leatherman with me, and we wore 2 jackets, and I got on that scale bulking up because I definitely dipped down to about 124 pounds, which was pretty scary. So, but yeah, I feel like God took care of me to that, and I wasn't too worried about it. I have checkups every 3 months, and every time everything's great.
So what is the radiation therapy actually like? I know nothing about it.
So you lay on a bed, and they had to make this mask because mine was targeted for my face and through my neck because I had cancer on my tongue, my tonsil, and in my lymph nodes. So they shoot these lights at you. You don't feel anything. You're in there 5 minutes. And then you go home, and it feels like somebody just got a stranglehold on your neck. And I was dry heaving a lot. I just couldn't control the sensations. And I just couldn't eat. Everything tasted terrible. It tasted like, it just tasted gross. Everything tasted terrible. Coffee, chocolate, everything that I loved. It got down to where all I could eat was ramen noodles with no salt, just the noodle itself. And I was eating that like twice a day and trying to choke it down. So that was probably the hardest part about it.
And it shrunk your throat, correct? It's still hard for you to eat today.
Right now, I do feel like my throat is tightening up. I asked my doctor about it, and he said just monitor it because they have a procedure where they can dilate it. And I'm not really wanting to do that, so I just I do smoothies for sure. They go right down. Yeah.
So, speaking of smoothies, so did you change your diet as part of all this? I don't think I've ever asked that. So I know your diet's pretty.
I'm a vegetarian. I quit eating meat probably about 5 or 6 years ago.
Okay.
So, that wasn't the reason why I changed it. But I read some stuff on cancer and the food you eat, and originally was hitting that pretty hard. A friend of ours, Mark, who passed away recently, he was real big into the Chris Beats cancer diet, and I just couldn't keep it up. So I still do. I love chocolate. It's very hard for me not to eat chocolate, but cancer feeds on sugar. And so you have to really be really careful how much sugar you're putting in your system if you have cancer, because it'll definitely eat it up. So
Very I think there's a lot of new studies coming out for diet and cancer, and very interesting time, I think, as far as that goes. So
well, as far as the teaching goes, I mean, obviously it's a blessing in itself to have an impact on that many lives, because you're giving them opportunities that they might not otherwise have. How much of a role do you think your ministry plays into the impact on the people that you're teaching?
So when it comes up in conversation, that I feel like that's when I have the opportunity to share. It is a private school, so you're allowed to talk about whatever you want. And I don't push it, but people definitely who follow me on social media find out right away that I have a book, and book's about a story about me being in prison and they go, what the heck happened? Like, you don't seem like the type to ever have gone through something like that. So that gives me the opportunity to kind of share my faith, and I'm very open about it. So, anybody that asks, I'll talk about it. And I used to talk about it before, but not as much now. I had shame behind it before, but now there's this peace. And I know that I'm forgiven, and I just want to share with everybody that you don't have to live with the guilt and shame of your past.
So I guess, I don't know if pushback's the right word, but I know we talked Veterans Day, where that was a little bit over a month ago now, and you said how Veterans Day is hard for you every year.
Yes.
So you still have something there.
The reason why is when people say, did you serve? And then say, thank you for your service. And I'm like, I did not serve honorably. So it's hard for me to accept the thanks. It's been easier than before. Veterans Day and Memorial Day have always been a struggle for me. But now that I know that people are like, well, you signed the line. You actually, regardless of the mistake you made, you put your name down on a piece of paper saying that I would give my life to my country. Even though I didn't serve honorably, to the end, I did make the choice. So it's been easier for me to accept the thanks, even though I know I didn't serve anybody because I was only on active duty for about 19 months before I just kind of disappeared for a while. So I have 5 years of service and 3 of them were in prison. So, yeah.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So you get the selfish question. Do you still get a DD Form 214
Yeah,
and all that?
I have one. It says dishonorable.
Dishonorable.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about trying to get it upgraded to general?
Yes, I almost went through that. At the time, the president in office said that Bo Bergdahl should be shot. And Bo Bergdahl was the soldier who was held by the Taliban for 5 years because he deserted his post. So he said deserters should be shot. And so I didn't think I had a chance.
You are going to cross that bridge.
No, and it costs, I think, about $5,000 for a package to send in for them to even think about maybe getting him pardoned. So for me, in order for me to have my record expunged completely, I need a presidential pardon. So,
okay. Yeah. And then kind of on something that you were talking about earlier, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking like, I didn't realize it, but you can't own a gun. Like you have a lot of restrictions still. Like
the main is the gun, which my wife is pretty excited about because she doesn't really want a gun in the house. I do miss firing weapons. That was kind of fun. I am allowed to vote because I did get that voting right restored. So
so you did get that.
Yes.
I was thinking about that earlier.
Yeah. So I can vote. I just can't own a gun.
Okay. So that's the main one is.
But years later, so I just got my cosmetology license in Iowa and my cosmetology instructor license in Iowa. And on the application, they said I have ever had any issues in my past. And I had to go through an entire procedure of pulling out all the paperwork. Luckily, I saved everything, kind of a pack rat when it comes to that kind of stuff. And I had all the documentation of all my history. And so I had to submit that and say what I've done over the past over 30 years to rectify the situation.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it's going to follow me for the rest of my life. The other thing about me getting my discharge upgraded or having my record expunged is that I don't really need man to tell me that I'm forgiven because I have God's forgiveness. And so I've kind of given up on the thought of ever doing that. So it's really not important to me anymore. Okay.
Talk about being a pack rat. And I kind of wanted to, your mom was a pack rat too. And that's kind of how you wrote the book, if I'm not mistaken. Because you wrote a lot of letters.
Yes.
And she had all those letters. So you weren't going through 20, 30-year-old memory. You were actually reading the letters,
right,
and using those to help rewrite the book. So how beneficial was that your mom kept all those letters?
So it was before her Alzheimer's we even noticed that she had Alzheimer's, and I said to my parents, hey, are you guys okay with me telling my story? Because I know this is going to open up a lot of pain from the past. And they're like, 100%, this is what God's telling you to do, go for it. I reached out to everybody else also to make sure I was honest and accurate with all of the stories I was telling, all the characters in the book whose names have been changed. I've been in contact with almost all of them. And then my mom hands me these letters, and I was like, wow, and they're in chronological order. It was me writing to her about what was going on every day in confinement up until the last year, because then they were visiting. I also read a book or two on Leavenworth to kind of put myself back in the facility and with the images and everything. So it was very beneficial. If I hadn't had that, it would probably be a little bit smaller.
How does God speak to you? I know a lot of people say just open the word and jumps out at you, but some people mistake that as I just move my finger and hope that's what he wants. I recently have been working on just being still and just listening for that. I think of it as the cricket on your shoulder. What is that little whisper after you ask a question? And mine are usually 2 or 3 word responses, and it's more of like you already know what I'm going to say.
So I've always struggled with this, and this is something I've got in some of the life groups I've been in. Like, how do you know when God's talking to you, or you're telling something, you're saying something to yourself? And I still don't always know. But what I found in the past 2 years, it's always been people. People have shown up, and people would say, "I've been praying for you," and I didn't even ask for it. So it's like God is speaking to me through other people being involved in my life, people of faith being involved in my life. I think when I read the word, obviously, I know that's God speaking to me directly, because those are his words, but I don't necessarily get the voice. I just get manifestations of him being present, if that makes sense, in my life. And I think and you must speak to everybody differently, because that's kind of how I get it. One example is I have a Medishare, and so with the cancer treatment, it was 100% paid for, with the exception of a $1,000 out-of-pocket expense. And then one day, $1,000 showed up at our door. Like the week I got my bill that I had to pay out of pocket, and it was somebody who I taught. Their parents decided they got an extra $1,000, and they said they were told to give it to David Mike.
Wow.
So this is what I mean by he just shows up sometimes through other people. And stories like that. It's just been crazy.
That's incredible. I love those kinds of stories. And my wife has had a very traumatic journey, and just seeing people just show up out of the woodworks, like never expecting. That blows my mind. And I think of the people that are, I've heard stories, on the way to buy a gun, take their own life, and they just say, "God, if you're real, make someone do a cartwheel on the street." And just time after time after time, seeing those things happen is just amazing to me.
Yeah. And I've never been the one that asked. When I first got arrested, I was like, "God, if you get me out of this," it was those kind of prayers. But I don't do that, because I know, I don't want him to be like a vending machine where I'm like,
Right.
If I swipe and you pay kind of thing. But he just shows up when I'm in need. So I want to be that for other people, and so hopefully I feel like I've had the opportunity to, when people have been in need, to know that there's redemption at the other end of confinement, addiction, and that kind of stuff. My book has made it into the hands of people who have needed to hear that message. It's been really great.
Have you had strangers reach out to you? And
Definitely.
How's that been?
All kinds of different. And because I use the internet a lot. So interestingly, I am in a Facebook group of people who have incarcerated loved ones, and I don't have one, but a woman invited me into there based on having read my book. So her son is incarcerated, so I sent a copy to her and her son, and so I can reach out to anybody who's in that group and say, "Does your kid need a copy of my book?" So I've been able to do that, and then they would reach out and say, I haven't heard from that inmate directly, but the parents. I've also connected with a woman who is working in a prison in Oklahoma. She has a cosmetology school in prison. So my story being, I talk about my hair journey as well here, but they're going to be going through the same thing when they graduate. Luckily, she advocates for them and gets them jobs. So I send a copy of my book to every one of her cosmetology graduates every year. So she has a group of 20 to 25 students who graduate, and then they get a copy of my book. And I just found out last year that my editor now works in that prison, and they have met, because she's from Oklahoma as well. It's, again, the circle that God keeps showing up and just say, "Hey, I'm working in your life." It's just.
I think we're going to use some of these for the thumbnail.
Yeah.
So this is actually, you can't see it on here, but these images are actually him when he was active duty with his hair, and he had
That's awesome.
he slicked it back. So
Yeah.
anyhow, he's always liked hair, I guess.
Yeah.
But anyhow, something you said reminded me. Something you said, I have to tell this. Valerie and I were driving down the street the other day, and there was I'll say homeless, I don't know if they actually were, but a person asked for money, and it was right there off 180th and Center. I said, "I asked Jesus to take the wheel this morning, this is where he dropped me off." And I was like, whether you're homeless or not, like, a lot of homeless people, or people that are asking for money, aren't necessarily homeless, but I was like, that's a creative one. So I want to do a study, like stand out there and like, anything will help, God bless, sign, see how much money I collect, and then put that one out and see how much money I collect and see if there's a difference in that one. So
I've seen people get pretty creative. They put like two buckets, one says Trump, one says Biden, and just see people keep putting that's genius.
Yeah, that's the first time I've always seen like God bless and stuff like that, but I've never seen someone like Jesus take the wheel, drop me off. So anyhow, I derailed it. I pulled a Tanner.
Well, so I feel like people that get incarcerated or get kind of put into this category, they become the forgotten and almost like disassociate from society. I mean, how do they reintegrate back into, as with someone who's been able to successfully do that, how do they reintegrate back into, working society?
Well, I've been told by a lot of people who've been in law enforcement and the justice system that I'm an anomaly, that this is not normal, because people usually come out and then they go right back. And the reason is because when they get out, they go right back to the same community, the same friends, the same activities, and they have no way to kind of get a job. And I think there's a lot of prison reform that's being worked on by people who were formerly incarcerated. I know a guy who used to be incarcerated here in Nebraska. Now he's a lawyer and he teaches law, and he's working on that. Another person that I connect with through the John Gordon organization, his name's Damon Smith, and Damon West. And he was put in prison for life, and now he's out, like going back to the same prison and preaching the word of God to people. So I feel like that's the only way that, I think if you're left to your own devices and you end up in the same place, the same playground, same play friends and all that kind of stuff, you're going to probably fall right back into it. I was convicted in Louisiana. I served time in Kansas, and then I moved to Omaha. So I had no connection to my past. So that's probably the first reason. The second reason was my family was completely invested in me. They helped me get back on my feet. I moved back in with them, and they helped me when I was, needing money before I can get a job, and they just really stood up for me. So I'm thankful for that. So if you don't have a network working on your side, then it's going to be very challenging.
And where along that road did you meet your wife?
So when I moved to Omaha, back to Omaha in 1997, I went back to the hair school, and my wife was right there waiting for me. She was one of my students. Okay. Yeah. So we started talking to each other, and you could tell there were some sparks there. And she's literally been the best thing that's ever happened to me. So we have 3 children together. I have 2 children from a previous marriage, and which is a whole other story. But she has accepted them into our family, and it's just been really great.
That's incredible.
And now your son's in the military as well.
Yep,
Just recently left.
Yep, he is now at Fort Bliss, Texas, and he's an infantry soldier. So, yeah.
So along the same lines of Tanner's question about making it back, what was it like being accepted into a church? So I know I've seen people that had an affair and they're ostracized from the church. Like just different things, and they're like, people push them out. But I mean, you're a criminal,
Mm-hmm.
Were you accepted? Was it talked about, or they didn't know because you were coming from Kansas and Louisiana, or what?
I don't think anybody knew, because I didn't really talk about it too much, except for on the job applications. And I didn't go to church when I first got out. I just kind of worked because I needed to get money to go to hair school, etc. And then I think I went to my parents' church a few times, but it's your parents' church, and my parents have moved around to a few churches over the years. I'm trying to think of. I think the church where I really felt accepted is no longer open. Interestingly, the pastor of that church also goes to that church. So when COVID happened, our church kind of dissolved. And so I think it's still, a few people still meet and merge with a different church. But I think it was during that maybe 10 years that we were at that particular church where I learned about what matters most is people finding Jesus and accepting people for who they are, and legalism is not the answer, and telling people what they're doing wrong is never going to be a good way for them to meet Christ. So
yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned legalism a couple times. I met this couple, they're 20 and 21, something like that, last weekend, and they were not Mormon, I can't think of the denomination right now, but anyhow, like that was the big thing. Like they pulled away from the church completely. They moved an hour and a half, 2 hours away because like they were, whatever denomination they were very legalistic, just causing, like she had a miscarriage due to stress and all that stuff from it. And yeah, I don't think it's easy to judge, but I don't know if it's always the best thing. So
right. It's not about the rules; it's about the relationship. Yeah. So and with each other and with God. So you can't. Rules are there to keep people safe. They're not there to beat people up.
Yeah, it's been a I guess, a topic this week because, like I said, had a conversation with him last weekend, and now you brought it up, so something I probably should look into more.
Right.
So while in prison, there's a guy who's named Dan Martell. He's a business coach, and he has a crazy story. You know, he grew up Canadian and was on the run, pulled a gun on a cop, and went to prison. He tells a story about one prison guard that got through to him and just kind of pulled him aside and was like, "What are you doing?" Like the same thing, like he said, they all wind up right back.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's such a Hollywood perspective of prison guards, and obviously all of them are soldiers, right?
Right.
Is there anyone in particular you can think of that kind of had an impact on you as more of a fatherly role, or was everyone kind of just
No, not in Fort Leavenworth, not at that time. No, they were just there to kind of keep us in line.
Because that was more like big basic style barracks.
It was actual prison with wings and cells and bars
Okay.
and everything. It was definitely it was built by the same people who built Alcatraz. So if you ever been to Alcatraz, you almost been to Leavenworth. It's the same thing. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Me and my wife went there for an anniversary, not to Alcatraz, but to San Francisco. But we visited Alcatraz, and I walked into one of the cells, and I'm like, I kind of got the sweats, and I was like, this is too close to
Wow.
yeah,
Get out of here.
yeah. It was kind of cool, but it was not cool at the same time. But yeah, but I didn't really have anybody mentoring me in there other than the relationships I had with the letters and people feeding to me from the outside.
So I was with the military police unit. It was my original unit, and I always had this negative connotation of MPs. Like they just got this chip on their shoulder, power. I'm big. Is that kind of how it is?
I feel like, especially there, and I think so. And another interesting story: there was a guy who read my book who was a guard at the same time I was there. I didn't know him then, but we've since met in person a few times. So there's a little letter in there about him, and he talks about his perspective as a guard. He was Air Force. He was an Air Force guard, but he says that he kind of was scared. You know, so you have to put up a little bit of bravado because you've got people in there that murder people, and you could be next. So yeah, I can understand why you would want to be a little tough and keep people in line, especially if you've got the baton.
And you're outnumbered.
Yeah, because there'd be like 2 people and there's 500 people in the room, you know.
Yeah. So.
And the prison I was in, it was all military. So everybody had a sense of discipline, even though they had made a mistake. And most people were first-time offenders because in order to get into the military, you can't really have committed a crime, you know, on paper anyways.
Right.
So it wasn't a lot of super crazy stuff that went on in there, although there was, you know. Somehow I avoided it all. You know, there was a big riot, I avoided that. There was inmate that was murdered, I avoided that. I knew who did it. And I was already up to the next custody level when it happened. So thankfully I didn't have any kind of connection to that kind of stuff.
So do you think that Leavenworth creates this box of us versus them, or do you think it is a rehabilitative process of trying to, serve your time, get out, and then do better for yourself?
I think that they have things in place. I can't speak now because it's been, years since I've been there. But when I was there, it was just a lot of button pushing. You just got to go to this, do that, and it's just like getting promoted in the military. You do the things they
So
say.
it sounds like the military is
Yeah, you just do what you got to do to get to where you need to be next.
We used to always say the military is a game. Like they lay out everything that you have to do. Like
it was basically a game.
Yeah.
Once I got out, the proof's in the pudding. Are you gonna stay out or are you coming back?
And so you're getting paid the entire time. Like you're still in the military. No, you're not.
No, I lost all forfeiture, all pay and allowances.
Okay.
So no pay. Once I got to the commissary, I bagged groceries. I got paid $2 a day, which went into a fund that I could use to buy things. And then when I got out, they gave me a check of what was left in there. It's like $300.
Okay, but so you're still, but you said your time of service continues.
Until you actually receive your discharge, you're still considered in the military. So when I got out on parole, I got an ID card that said parole on it. I was able to go on off it until my discharge was finalized, and then I had to surrender my parole.
So what happens when people have a longer sentence than their service contract? Do they have to re-enlist in prison?
To the benefit of the service. So they don't re-enlist them, your time is extended.
Okay, interesting. I know very little about it. I guess I was a mechanic for the MPs, and it was very you guys are idiots. We're staying away from you. So, but
Any other
no, this is
commentary?
no, this is fascinating, and I do truly appreciate you sharing your story, and I believe that creating this book is going to, it's going to keep God's word and work in a way that it'll connect to people that really need to hear it. And none of us sitting here know exactly the impact that will have, but I truly believe that sharing your story and putting yourself out there is going to change many lives.
It's kind of crazy because a self-published book usually only lasts about a year and a half, and I published, I think it was in 2014 or 16, I can't remember. It's been about 7-8 years, and people still buy it, and I do promote it still on social media, but it just keeps circulating. So I feel like God's not done with my story yet. I don't want another one. I just want to tell this one. But it's just cool that he still uses it. I'm glad to be used that way.
Yeah, it's I didn't know anything about it, so we kind of talked broad level. I think he gave this to me after we'd met a couple times.
Right.
Something I remember. It was pretty early on of meeting you, and read it. Easy read, pretty straightforward, quick read. I had to ask Valerie. Like I said, she knew you 20 years ago, so she didn't know any of it either.
Oh, wow.
Well, I mean, she knew there was something, but she didn't know the story.
Yeah, so that was during the time when I wasn't really sharing over, but once God kept just telling me through people that were like, "You did what? You should write a book." I was like, "I don't really know." And then just everything fell in place. It just one thing after the other just fell in place, and then the book came out, and it was like, wow. And then I read it. When I read it now, I do about once a year. It's kind of reconnected the story, and when I read it, I'm like, I just don't feel like I wrote that. I don't think I really did. I think it was, I had a lot of help.
Does that feel like a lifetime ago? Like a totally different person?
Yeah, I can't even see myself as the character in this book, which is unreal.
And they said when we first sat down, you've lived 5 lifetimes. So.
Yeah. The police officer that who I named in the book, he actually paid for the narrator for the audio version because it's something I put off for quite a while. And once I found out I had throat cancer, he just called me and said, "Hey, don't be mad, but pick a narrator. I'm paying for this," and he totally took care of it for me.
Wow.
So now
there's
an audio version. It's not me reading it, but I interviewed a few people and I found somebody who seemed young enough and could sound emotional about the subject, and I think he did a really good job. So you can do softback, Kindle, or audio.
Wow. Well, this has been insightful. The closest to understanding what it means to get a dishonorable discharge that I came was when I was still active duty when COVID was going on, and I refused to get the pokey savvy. We were getting all kinds of threats of, basically we're filing your dishonorable paperwork and all this stuff, and I panicked, so. But it's very cool to just hear the other side of it, and life goes on, right?
Right.
You're not defined by your past. So.
100%. Yeah.
Cool. Well, appreciate it, and you might want their book. What's the best way to get it?
So it's on Amazon, and you can order on Amazon. You have to type in the name Dishonor and then David Mike's. I think the video game comes up if you just do Dishonor. It's on Audible also under Dishonor and then my name. And then I think you can also get it on Apple Audio. It's like Apple Books, and then the audio version is there as well.
Awesome.
And so, or if you know anybody who's incarcerated, you can reach out to me on my social media. And Dilemma Mike is my social media handle, 1 L and 2 M's, because some people don't know how to spell dilemma. And so you can get it by reaching out to me.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Yep.